Today I want to talk about deliberate practice and why it might not be the right approach for you. How's it going? If you're new here, my name's James. I am a movement coach specializing in the brain and nervous system. Across my life and career, I guess, I have participated in a number of different sports competitively, including gymnastics, slacklining, and speed cubing. I've also spent a good portion of time as a professional circus performer, a musician, and I've spent an even greater chunk of time as a coach, tutor, or teacher in all of those different disciplines. And so for me, one of the biggest things I love to nerd out on is the science of learning itself. What actually makes people learn quicker? And is that the same approach that the most successful people actually take? We sometimes take it for granted that the person who's sitting at the top of the pyramid did everything in the most efficient way to get there. But when you start to zoom in and look at it more closely, turns out that's very often not the case. I've already made a video about failure and how we hear this kind of rhetoric that the people who fail the most are the ones who end up being the most successful. And it's not necessarily true. It's the people who almost succeeded the most tend to be the ones who ride that kind of success wave. What it seems to be more indicative of is people who learned how to enjoy failure were able to tolerate it better and therefore became more successful. This gets interesting when we look at the different ways that people practice, because there's actually been some research done on top performers, whether it's in sports, athletics, career, and one of the sort of rules that they came up with was this 10,000 hours of deliberate practice that all top world-class performers seem to have done in order to get where they are. Before we go any further, I know there's loads of problems with the whole 10,000 hours part of that statement, but I'm not going to get into all the details of that right now, so we're just going to call it what it is and assume that 10,000 hours of practice is exactly the number, because it doesn't really matter too much for what we're going to talk about next. The research from this initially came from a guy called Anders Ericsson, who did a study on musicians at, I believe, a very prestigious university, and he found that the ones who ended up being the most successful out of that group were not necessarily the ones who did the most practice. They usually were the ones who did the most practice, but they were also separated from the kind of mid-tier musicians in the fact that they hadn't just done more practice, they had also done a better quality of practice at the same time. This is what he termed as deliberate practice. It was a style of practice where rather than just, playing the same song over and over again, they would analyze their performance for weaknesses, and then they would hone in on those weaknesses and make those things stronger. So deliberate practice, in essence, is basically just finding the things that you suck at and training those things to be better so that you don't suck at them anymore, and therefore your performance as a whole increases. Then when people started looking at this in other areas, they did find that it is correct that the top world-class performers in pretty much every single thing that there is seem to be getting there by committing more hours of deliberate practice to their discipline than anybody else in that field. And that's pretty cool information to have. Like, if we know that the secret to success is to do more deliberate practice than anybody else, especially if you find a field where you're more likely to succeed, then the solution seems really, really easy. If I want that for me, then that's what I should do. The big mistake that happens here is people equate somebody who has done more deliberate practice being at the top of the pyramid to somebody who was always doing more deliberate practice at every stage of their career. I've been coaching different sports and different art forms for, I don't even know how long, 21, 22 years now. And I've spent a lot of time at multiple different levels. In fact, I've got to see progression over such a long period that I can see how some of the first gymnasts that I ever started coaching have turned out in their adult life. Some of them have even gone on to become Olympic gold medalists. So I'm going to try and explain this through my own kind of personal experience. I believe there is research done into this as well that finds some of the same answers that I'm going to give here. If you're interested in looking into that more, I'd highly recommend checking out the book, The Talent Code by, I forget, I'll put it here. Okay, so let's take one little step back here, and first we're going to not talk about the most successful people, but we're going to talk about the people who are on their way to becoming the most successful people. Usually in my coaching experience, these have been teenagers at the kind of top of their game in their sports or in circus. And when you get teenagers that know this is exactly what they want to do with their life, you will absolutely find people who are willing to work harder than anybody else. And you will absolutely get another category of people who are willing to find out how to work smarter than everybody else. But the thing is, out of all the teenagers I ever taught when it came to gymnastics or circus, quite a large number of them ended up burning out or crashing out really, really hard. While working harder than everybody else is a really commendable trait and something that probably is really important if you want to be successful, the long-term consequences of it can be pretty dire. When you start working harder than other people, you get into habits really quickly. The only way you can keep it up is by developing the habits of getting up and working constantly every single day. The problem with habits is if they're not healthy, they're gonna wear you down very, very quickly. And so one group of teenagers would crash and burn super hard even though they had exactly the right amount of determination. The other group, who were trying to work smarter than everybody else, also burned out, but they never really seemed to make any meaningful difference to their habits or their lifestyle. The act of working smarter, which is essentially what deliberate practice is, finding your weaknesses and building on them over and over again, day after day, is really psychologically draining. What you're essentially doing when you're deliberately practicing is exposing yourself to failure again and again and again. You're finding the thing that you're really bad at, and you're forcing yourself to just sit and be bad at it until you gradually get a little bit better. And once you're actually good at it, you don't get to sit and bask in it and like enjoy things for a while. You just jump straight to the next thing that you're bad at, and you have to build that up again and again. So what I saw time after time was one group of teenagers who were the hard workers who would just end up crashing out with injuries and burnout. The other group who would just get so frustrated and upset that they couldn't see any difference in how their life was going, and eventually they just knock it on the head and decide they wanted to do something else. And this for me is the problem with deliberate practice, is if you just take the concept by itself and decide this is how you're going to train for the rest of your life, you are going to burn out very, very quickly, because it's not really a sustainable model for a brain that is functioning with no kind of experience of how it works in the long term. What's more, if we zoom back even further to all of the people I know who have become super successful, especially in the field of gymnastics, but I know others who have gone on to different sports as well. When I knew them as kids, they did not care at all for deliberate practice. I have never really come across a young child who is really, really obsessed with focusing on their faults and their weaknesses. What kids care about is fun. And the relationship I saw between the athletes that do really, really well and their learning progression is all of them start out looking for the fun in what they do. All of them start out with building their motivation that way and building habits through positive and fun experiences. Once they're having fun and they've got things in a habit, suddenly they get motivated to learn new things and get better. But even then, they don't start by deliberately practicing. They start by just taking anything that comes to them and looking for like the new quick fix or the quick win that's going to get them better with very little effort involved. And in fact, for most of the athletes that I've seen become successful, there has been about a decade of learning at least where they've gone from this is fun and I just want to keep doing it every single day, all the way towards wanting to specifically focus on their weaknesses. So the real challenge here is not to learn the discipline to deliberately practice every day. The actual challenge is to figure out how to start enjoying working on things that you suck at. Over the years, the top athletes probably had a coach at one point that said, hey, you know, if you just got better at that one thing, you'd probably do really well in this competition that's coming up this Saturday. And they took the advice, they tried the thing, and suddenly they got all the glory by seeing the results go way up in this competition, and that lit a small amount of a spark that made them go, hey, maybe there's something else that I'm not good at that I could get more results in as well. And like I said before, these were probably quick fixes. They weren't things that took a lot of work. They probably weren't the things that they were worst at. They were probably just small little weaknesses that were easy to find, easy to sort out. Then they spend a little bit of time in that zone and they build that into a habit and they actually kind of like it. Once they kind of like that, then it's not that much of a step down to look at things that you're a bit worse at and a bit worse at until eventually you're actually at a point where you love the idea of training things that are draining and soul destroying to most other people. So if you're a cuber, especially somebody who's a bit older and you're looking into like these ideas of deliberate practice, it might be worth taking a bit of a step back, examining your life and figuring out what stage are you actually at in reality. Are you at the point where if you just start focusing on your weaknesses, you're really going to love and enjoy the process? You might be. You might not have got those skills through speed cubing. You might have done it through homework or any other kind of sport or activity. But if you're not there yet, it might be a smarter idea to figure out exactly what you can tolerate in a way that you'll physically enjoy it. Enjoyment leads to habits. Habits lead to success. Once you're getting the successes, then we can start building new, more difficult habits that will have greater long-term results. So that was a pretty long video. If you stuck it with me, thank you very much. Maybe leave a comment, let me know who actually watched all of this. But I think these are some of the more important things that I want to talk about, even if they're not as popular to watch as like the quick fix exercises. When I'm working with athletes, unfortunately, the bigger conversations are usually these sort of reality checks, and I'm going to continue making videos about them because this is what I enjoy doing, and hopefully I can help other people enjoy some of the difficult stuff as well. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment, let me know what you'd like me to talk about next, and I'll see you in the next one.